Hey, you all. I am so glad you're here and that you stopped by to learn with me today. This episode, I have to tell you the truth. I had to tell on myself in this episode. We are diving into the question together: how does genealogy impact cultural context? I'm your host and guide, Justine Gonzalez, and welcome to the Cultural Capacity Podcast. Let's get compassionately curious together as we answer the question: how does genealogy impact cultural context? You know the drill. If you are interested in any resources I mention or reference, you can find them all in the show notes. And stay tuned after our full intro. You will hear a short ad from me and my love of my life, Thaddeus Scott. We're probably going to re record that ad for y'all in the new year, FYI. But enjoy and be sure to leave us a voice memo, hit follow, or share if you find value in this episode. Thanks so much and enjoy. Welcome y bienvenidos to the Cultural Capacity Podcast, an Educator Aid Incorporated sponsored learning tool. I'm your host and guide, Justine Gonzalez, and here on the Cultural Capacity Podcast, we are committed to exploring and supporting individuals and organizations on their journey of self-aware leadership, emotional wellness, and development of effective cross-cultural communications. Be sure that you check out each of the show's episode notes, where every time we're sharing free learning resources and tools, as well as text recommendations, workshops, trainings, and also featured guests in our monthly extended episodes where we feature thought leaders, both existing and emerging, across these realms of topics that we explore together. The design of our episodes, like this one you're about to hear, is where we typically spend around 15 minutes diving deep with one specific question. This is intentional by design, so be sure that you tune in throughout the whole episode. Tap into the show notes to explore and examine both the free and paid resources for you and your teams, the organizations you serve in. And be sure to hit follow, subscribe, or share when you find value and feel led to share with others. I'm so glad that I'm here with you. I'm so glad, most of all, that you showed up for yourself today. Let's dive in together and let's continue to live out our lives in a compassionately curious way that brings out the best in not only ourselves, but in those we interact with every day. Welcome to episode 26 of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I cannot believe that it has been about 1 year since we released our first episode here on the Cultural Capacity Podcast. My name is Justine Gonzalez, and I am your host and guide on this podcast where we get to come together and we dive in and examine one specific question. So, this episode's question, we are diving into the topic of genealogy. What is it? And why is it important to my life's journey? You might be thinking, wow, this is wild, Justine. So I have to tell you what about one of my new discovered hobbies. And it is something that I have my mother to thank for. I really have my mother and father to thank for, to be honest with you, because they did a very good job. And I know this now from the conversations that I have with colleagues, with friends, even my siblings. I think that both of my parents did an excellent job, regardless of how you hear me sometimes candidly speak about cultural dysfunction, growing up in a bicultural home, those things. Yes, those are all part of me and part of what make me who I am. Just like you have a unique story to share with the world. You have unique DNA that is meant to leverage and magnify the gifts that you were brought into this world with. I firmly believe that in my soul. So I want to encourage you for a moment. If you're feeling down, remember your DNA and your makeup as a person first and foremost, before your job titles, before your familial titles, right? Whether that's sister, wife, mother, daughter, auntie, niece, etc. All the titles and labels that we create in this world currently, you are so much more than those things. So if you find yourself caught up in titles today, I don't know even why that came to me, but I hope that that helps somebody. If you hear that, remember, I always think of something that Ram Dass, who is one of my teachers that I do some studying with at times through some of his work throughout the years and examining myself. But Ram Dass always says, soul, not role. And I think that that quote is really fitting for this particular episode because if I'm really being honest with myself and I'm turning the mirror on myself, there are parts, even though my parents did a great job of highlighting each of them individually, some specific family heritage and lineage components about their lives and their families. I think all of us can stand to go even deeper. And I will openly admit to you and to anybody who I talk with about these topics that as a third culture kid, which is essentially a person who you are raised in two very distinct cultures, even within your immediate home that you're raised in by two parents from very different cultural lenses. And this could be racial as well. This could be color and skin tone as well. This could be ethnic and tribal lineages as well. It could be from beliefs. It could be from a number of things. And my own existence has had many of those factors. So you will often hear me talk about this because I'm a sample size of one, and the story I know best is my own. And I can only share with you my own unique experiences and hopes that you have the same passion and drive to want to learn deeply about yourself because you are so valuable and you have so much to offer, excuse me. An author, that is one thing that I do is author articles and books and stuff. But on that same vein, I'm telling on myself because there have been portions of my family genealogy, as I think many people can relate to, especially if you are white passing or lighter skin toned like myself, that quite frankly, it can be terrifying, right? We don't want to read the stories of pillaging and rape and the things that we know exist. And it's this knowingness not only in your mind and body and soul, but in your heart of hearts, knowing there that it is up to me to resolve this dissonance. Whether you have two parents who were the same race, or you were adopted, or wherever you find yourself, we hold things within our DNA. And I think that genealogy and getting into that study gives us a different window, and it's giving me a different understanding and empathy even for my own lineages that I am uncovering. And so I think that it's normal. I'll continue to share about this journey just because it is having such a profound impact on how I understand myself. I will say the same thing if you go back and listen to the episode on the process communication model. That has had a profound way impact on me in the way how I communicate, why I communicate, and how I better understand others, my own motivations, my psychological structure through a personality lens. So some of these things you hear me talking about is because I'm learning about these things with you. And I want to share that knowledge with others because my God, when you start to dive into who you really are and how these things impact us, it really reveals so much about about how we function and how we operate, and maybe how we also reconcile the same elements I was just speaking of, in knowing that essentially you're a product of plunder. A bunch of my ancestors killed and raped and murdered a bunch of my other ancestors, and that's prevalent on both lines of my family. So I think from both the mother's lines and the father's lines. So I think when you get into this, as heavy as that might sound to some people, or we're still in a place where maybe you're listening to this and you go, man, I'm terrified to go to church counseling. I'm terrified to go to a therapist. Um, I think one of the ways that can be kind of cool, especially if you're a person who likes solving mysteries or puzzles or that type of thinking. I'm very much wired that way. I could sit and do puzzles for hours as a kid. I could sit and read books as a kid and get lost, and it would take me to a different world, And that is how my brain works. Maybe that's not you. So that's why I try to share pretty thoroughly and in depth with any question we examine on this podcast, because then you can make a determination of, wow, this episode spoke to me and this inspired me to want to investigate this about myself, about this aspect of myself. So, genealogy, as we see it defined, of course, in the Oxford Dictionary, is quite literally the study and tracing of lines of descent or development. The study and tracing of lines of descent or development. Another definition of genealogy from the Oxford Dictionary is a plant's or animal's line of evolutionary development from earlier forms. So, in layman's terms, and as far as the field of study, genealogy is the study of families, familial history, and the tracing of your lineages. And typically, if somebody is an actual genealogist, which I would consider myself an amateur, just personally researching my own genealogy, but an actual trained genealogist, they use oral interviews, they use historical records, they use genetic analysis and other records that you can demonstrate, like you can actually obtain that information to demonstrate the kinship and pedigrees of your family and its unique members. And this requires time, effort, energy, often money to have access to the highest quality of genetic tests and all these pieces, right? So, anyways, all this to say, I wanted to give us a common definition of how genealogy is defined. Let y'all know that I'm an amateur, but I am uncovering so much about not only my family, but the most impactful thing I'm finding is my understanding. Many of you might know this title. There's a text called The Body Keeps Score, and it's specifically about trauma. I have also had a journey, and I'm excited. I believe she's going to be a guest on our Extended Voices episodes, which will begin airing in 2023, where those are extended interviews that I've done with people from all walks of life and different sectors, those type of things. But one of those interviews will be with a hypnotherapist based out of Chicago, and one of the things I've gotten into, because I have engaged a variety of healing modalities and therapies over the years in conjunction with my own, professional development, evolution, those type of things, which we're all encountering on any given day at any portion of our path. So one of the things I've gotten really keen to, though, is looking and examining and reflecting on some of my hypnotherapy sessions, some of my work with therapists in the past, understanding the connection between some of my own traumas in this life, and then also understanding that DNA is truly like, it's part of this whole thing. And so, and obviously with some of my research area being cultural neuroscience, I'm very interested in how we hold on to experiences, how we develop new neural pathways, to quote unquote expand a comfort zone when it comes specifically to conversations about emotions, conversations about topics like equity and inclusion and racism and all of these topics that can sometimes be considered quote unquote hot button topics in the workplace, but they are such a day-to-day daily part of all of our lives. And so building that awareness and really understanding first and foremost ourselves very, very deeply, I just think is very, very important. And so I do want to read you a little detail. This is actually from scientificamerican.com. And I will link this in the show notes, as I always do. Any resources I read or reference, I will always put in the show notes. But I want to read really quickly from this article, and you can expand and explore the whole thing on your own. But I want to frame this up to just kind of whet your appetite, because it's what started getting me more interested in connecting the dots of dealing with some past traumas in my own life, understanding my body and how it's wired, and then also marrying this with having a complete understanding of perhaps things that my ancestors also experienced, and looking at that all the way down to a cellular DNA level if we're going back to these famous sayings or even the text I referenced, the body keeps score. And you often hear people make comments, especially in therapy in those type of circles, the issues are in the tissues. You hear about generational traumas. So I'm going to start reading from the article really briefly, and then I will link it. And as always, we will end with continuously getting compassionately curious together on our paths in life. All right. We normally think that every cell in our body contains the same genome, the complete set of genetic information that makes up the biological core of our individuality. However, there are exceptions where the body contains cells that are genetically different. This happens in cancers, of course, which arise when mutations create genetically distinct cells. When most people do not realize, however, what most people do not realize, however, is that the brain has remarkable genetic diversity, with some studies suggesting there may be hundreds of mutations in each nerve cell. In the developing brain, mutations and other genetic changes that occur while brain cells divide are passed down to a cluster of daughter cells. As a result, the adult brain is composed of a mosaic of genetically distinct cell clusters. We know that the activity and organization of the brain changes in response to experience. Memories and learning are reflected in the number and strength of connections between nerve cells. We also know that the brain is genetically mosaic, but a new study makes a remarkable connection between experiences and the genetic diversity of the brain. It suggests that experience can change the DNA sequence of the genome contained in brain cells. This is a fundamentally new and unexplored way in which experience can alter the brain. It is of great scientific interest because it reveals the brain to be pliable to its genetic core in response to the world around us. The genome is the molecular signature of identity. And that ends the excerpt I've read. The title of the article, Early Life Experience, It's in Your DNA. And the subtitle or captioned, Surprising Study Suggests Experiences While Young Cause the Brain to Experience Changes to the Genome. So, full circle, what is genealogy and why is it important? Genealogy is really just studying the descent and lineages or tracing the lines of descent and development of our own unique DNA and bloodlines, essentially, examining that evolutionary development from earlier previous forms of our ancestors on this earth and examining the events that perhaps occurred with them as well. So leave me a voice memo or share this out. You can, I don't, whatever you find value. But I am very interested in continuing to see others who are on this path of researching their unique genealogy and also examining that tie between the brain and culture. All right. Until next time, let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care. Thank you so much for showing up for yourself today and also tuning in to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. We couldn't do this show without the help and support of listeners and viewers in 2023 when we will add our extended episodes to our YouTube channel. So please search Educator Aid on YouTube and subscribe now. We are in the process of officially launching that channel. Haven't been utilizing it for a number of years, and we're excited. We're excited to have you join in on these powerful conversations where we are going to be having some extended episodes and you get to sit down and tune in and learn from some incredible thought leaders. So again, thank you for your commitment to yourself and your own personal learning as well as professional development journey. I thank you for being here, and let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care.